It seems like this isn't just, the stick out of the carrot and stick approach, but that President Trump actually wants to use tariffs as a means to compliance.
Yes, and I think if this is baked in, if President Trump is sticking to this line about keeping tariffs in place, don't forget there are tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese exports to the US, then that is a potentially significant hurdle for these trade talks, because a priority for China has been removing these tariffs, at least part of the tariffs, part of the $250 billion US dollars. And if President Trump is saying that those tariffs are going to remain for a substantial amount of time, then it's very difficult to see what China is going to do, because they need the Chinese to come away from this deal to show their public and to show members of the Communist Party here that this is more than just a one-sided deal. Of course, China's leaders, President Xi, faces different political pressures to President Trump, but there are those political pressures, and we know there are divisions within the party and within the government over how to approach these conversations. So this is potentially significant, and we've already heard, of course, we were reporting yesterday on how the Chinese had started to push back on some of their previous US demands around things like protection of data for pharmaceutical companies, because from the Chinese perspective, they have made significant changes to, for example, their intellectual property policy. They've passed a foreign investment law, and the Chinese were hoping that the US would reciprocate by at least engaging in a discussion about the removal of tariffs. But we know, of course, that for a long time the US side has said they need to have the possibility of using tariffs to enforce any future deal. And for a long time, President Trump has said that previous US administrations have failed and fallen down in terms of negotiations and deals with the Chinese because they haven't had an enforcement mechanism. But if he is sticking to this line that tariffs are going to remain on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods, then again, that could prove problematic. You could expect further pushback from the Chinese. Maybe this timetable of discussions could get pushed further into the second half of this year as well.
Yeah, no wonder we have been hearing that that potential Trump-Xi summit could happen as early as this month, and it was April. Then I think I've heard as far as June. What's the timeline looking like right now?
Well, the good news is that the negotiations are expected to continue. We're likely to get US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, along with the US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, here in Beijing at some point early next week to continue, we've been told, high-level talks with their Chinese counterparts. And then Vice Premier Liu He, who leads the Chinese negotiating team, will travel, we've been told, to Washington to continue these negotiations. But there are more than this is a more significant set of hurdles now around the tariffs. As I said, they've consistently said, the Chinese, or at least in the last few weeks, that this needs to be a two-sided deal. They need to come with something, the Chinese come away with something in terms of these negotiations. It can't just be seen as a one-sided deal.